Welcome everyone to our Hacking HR Forum or Toronto chapter event, the first one for 2021. And today we're joined by 5 amazing speakers. Co-hosting with me is Laura Latham from Flip. She'll be introducing herself shortly. And for those of you who don't remember me, my name is Aldine Simmons-Thorpe, and I am a co-host of the Toronto chapter here with Bill Banham. I am an HR consultant and operations expert, and I've been working in this space for over a decade. And today I am the host and co-hosted with Laura our Hacking HR Forum for 2021. Now, just before I introduce our amazing group of speakers, I want to give us a quick little overview of what Hacking HR is and also localize it to Toronto. So Hacking HR is a global community of HR and business leaders, practitioners, consultants, technologists, and many others passionate about the intersection of the future of work, technology, people, and organizations. We believe that HR can be a trailblazer, guiding people and organizations to thrive in the new world of work. Normally, HR is taking the back seat, but we believe that we are the drivers and we can be drivers and we can help equip other areas of our companies to become really proficient at building a workplace where everyone is welcome and comfortable. The Hacking HR community addresses global trends and topics, driving the conversations and solutions, co-creation at the local level through the chapters and their members. And right here in Toronto, we have our own local chapter. And even though we are not able to meet in person, we continue to keep the discussion and conversation alive through our virtual events. So I will ask Laura to just come on screen and say hi and just introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so glad to be co-hosting with Aldine. So a little bit about me is I am an HR professional. I'm focused on performance and engagement at Flip Corporation. It's a tech company. I'm also certified in EQI and executive coaching, which I'm very passionate about. I'm really passionate about talent management as a whole, learning and development, individualized wellness, and unlocking individuals' potential to be the best versions of themselves. So I really love these events because it gives us quick information on how we can implement great resources into our current landscape. And I'm really looking forward to our wonderful presenters today. So thank you so much, Aldine.
My pleasure. And Laura will be taking it away in the panel discussion segment of our conversation, which leads me to what's going to happen next. So as is true to our Hacking HR format, we're going to invite our speakers to challenge themselves to give us some thought-provoking presentations in a short period of time. So they have about 8 to 10 minutes to really bring home their message and share their thought leadership with us. And afterwards, we're going to invite you, our audience, as well, to challenge their thinking and challenge their processes through the questions that you will ask. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in and I'm going to share with you the 5 speakers that we have with us today. So first and foremost, we've got Jeremy Shaky. He's the co-founder and CEO at Lighthouse Labs. And today he'll be talking to us about upskilling and reskilling employees. Jeremy is a passionate advocate and believer in educational reform, the opinion leader on changing communities to be technology leaders. Prior to this initiative, Jeremy worked in the new business development for Sugar Media. He holds a bachelor's degree from Concordia University in political science and now influences the future of work from the seat of CEO at Lighthouse Labs. After Jeremy, so welcome Jeremy, and he will be followed today in presentation by Roger Thorpe, president of Thorpe Benefits, and he will be tackling how technology has impacted benefits and wellness. And I'm sure if you're sitting back at home, you've probably used telemedicine, you've probably filed your wellness claim through your app. So today, Roger is really going to dial in on how technology can continue to revolutionize benefits and how we deliver some of these to our employees. So Roger joined Thorpe Benefits back in '97 and later acquired ownership of the company in 2005. Since then, he's built a team of senior consultants that understand group benefits inside out and provide customized solutions that are cost-effective and incorporate wellness designed to promote employee health, maintain employee loyalty, increase retention, and enhance a company's culture overall appeal. Roger is passionate about high performance living where training and improvement never stops. So you can easily see how Roger, is an easy member of our HR community, and I'm really looking forward to him sharing with us how technology has impacted benefits and wellness. In the middle, we have Brittany Taylor, partner at Rudner Law, and they are an employment law firm right here in Toronto. And her topic today will be health and safety obligations in and out of the workplace. Now, if you're not already familiar with how COVID-19 has been impacting our workforce and the workplace, Brittany is going to be tackling some of the hottest questions that employees and employers have been asking and really sharing some practical advice. I want to call it at this point that any presentation or information shared in her presentation is purely for information and educational purposes only, and this presentation does not substitute legal advice. Should you have another question or something more specific, we encourage you to connect with Brittany Taylor after this, during the session, on LinkedIn or through her law office at Rudner Law. Brittany was actually attracted to employment law because of the people-focused nature of the practice, and she really enjoys getting to know her clients and learning their stories. She believes every case is unique and often deeply personal. At the same time, the stories and solutions are inherently relatable, and work forms a hugely significant part of our day-to-day lives. This area of the law is also constantly evolving, which makes it even more engaging and challenging. Since being called to the Ontario Bar in 2013, Brittany has been dedicated to assisting both employers and employees to manage their workplaces with a proactive and preventative approach. Following Brittany, we will have Dean Delpinish, I believe, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, Senior Manager, Talent Acquisition at Fix Software, when diversity meets recruitment, and we will focus on the D&I conversation in this presentation. Dean is a diversity and inclusion strategist who has spent more than a decade focused on innovation, talent management, and creating frameworks of equality for organizations. He's a professor of diversity in the workplace at George Brown College, is currently the Senior Manager of Talent Acquisition and Diversity at Fix Software, and also runs a consultancy, Strategy, where he helps organizations design a strategic framework focused on diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity. His session is designed today to help leaders and HR build talent pipelines for diversity to contribute to your organization's overall business strategy through proven methodologies. And to close us out today, we will have world famous Bobby Umar, CEO of DYPB, Discover Your Personal Brand. And today he'll be talking to us about how we can leverage our employees' personal brands. Bobby is one of the most prolific heart-based leaders in North America. Inc. magazine named him one of the top 100 leadership speakers, named alongside such noteworthy giants as Richard Branson, Brene Brown, John Maxwell, and Robin Sharma. Bobby is a 5-time TEDx speaker and one of the top influencers in the world with over 500,000 followers. He has been named the 2nd best coach to follow on Twitter and 4th best leadership influencer according to Cred. Bobby is a social media influencer who champions authentic connection and heart-based leadership. Now, with a panel like this, I'm sure we're looking forward to dive right in to hear what they have to share with us. And we encourage you to stick around at the end as we bring them all back for a panel where they'll be able to share and answer some of the critical questions that we may have out of their presentations or just based on hearing the topics that they will be speaking on today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Jeremy.
Thank you so much, Aldine. And I'm very happy that they did not put me right after Bobby. I was worried about it right coming here today. Very smart move, making him our last speaker. I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm going to share my screen here really quick and just get everybody going. So basically, first of all, I'm the CEO of Lighthouse Labs. Actually, let me just pull up. Sorry, I just got organized multiple screens here. There we go. So I'm the CEO of Lighthouse Labs. We do a lot in the training space. I'll kind of go through that in a second, but I really liked, let's go to present. I really liked the introduction by Aldine when she talked about this event and what it's supposed to be. She mentioned the intersection of HR, future of work, technology, people, and I believe it was business. And in terms of what I do and where I work, we do not consider ourselves specifically an HR-based company, and yet the kind of work we do aligns so well with the crowd that I'm here presenting to today, and that actually perfect description that I get so enthusiastic to be able to speak to all of you about my favorite topic, which is the upskilled workforce, and how learning and lifelong learning and all the things that come with it is something that is more and more becoming a responsibility at the workplace as opposed to in education institutions. And how that blend happens and where it happens and why it's so important is a subject really, really close to my heart, something that really where we started Lighthouse in a lot of ways. So funny enough, Lighthouse is not known for its upskilling side nearly as much as it's known for its reskilling side, but we focus on three major components in any program that we build. We focus on speed, and the goal of speed, it's not what you hear from most education institutions, but we really believe that learning has to be happening at the speed of life and everything that's happening around us. And we really have three quadrants of what people want in their lives. There's time to live, and then there's employers who want you to work and want the actual productivity of your work. And then somewhere in the middle of both of those things is supposed to be the time to learn. And everybody says they want to learn, and employers say they want you to learn, and everyone talks really grandly about it. And yet nobody wants to give up the time of your life or your work. And often actually the employee is asked to give up their time, or they refuse to give up their time, and employers get very frustrated over a lack of learning. Lighthouse's main focus, our number one priority, is making learning happen better and better within the flow of work, happen more efficiently, happen more effectively. And you can't do things at speed, at a great speed, without having outcomes and results. Because if you do things fast, but it doesn't amount to anything, then that's not fast at all. That's just useless. So our second major value proposition that we think about at Lighthouse is outcomes. Effective training. That's something that really goes hand in hand. If anybody has suggestions for words that blend those two into just one perfect thing other than the word efficiently, I would love to hear about it, because we're constantly looking for it, but those two go together kind of perfectly for us. So it's made us a little bit special as an organization as we think about these two things. And then the how we do what we do is really through personalization. And people don't think about that quite. They think about one size fits all programs. They think about how do you get as many people into a class as possible, but really how are programs and learning designed to know where someone is exactly in the moment of where their mindset is, where the context they have is, all the things they need to know, and how are you helping them take their next hurdle? That's actually the answer to speed, is how you get someone to where they need to the fastest and you get the best possible outcome is through personalization. The challenge is always the scale of personalization and how you handle all of that. So that's the three things that Lighthouse is focused on the most. We've helped 30,000 Canadians. We've been equipping them with the relevant tools they need. And I guess in just really quickly from 2013 to now, you can see the 20,000 students is actually more along the reskilling side of things we do. We have 96% employment rates as developers within 180 days of our reskilling programs. Our specialty is definitely industry driven education. It's all coming back. There's a back and forth feedback loop for all that type of stuff that's regularly happening. And our real goal and focus is to train the next generation of experts, of tech experts. What we're seeing more than anything, we started with code and software, and what we're seeing more than anything is the increase of demand for data. And that's really happening in the workplace, whereas code is something useful for a lot of people. Data is essential for just about every professional at this point, and it's whether they realize it or not. And that's what I'm really here to kind of speak about with all of you. So I've introduced my company. I'm not thrilled with my marketing team for including this picture in here, but I understood that I had to talk about myself really quickly. So as a CEO of Lighthouse Labs, we've gone through our own stages of growth. We've gone through some pretty big jumps. We've gone through some decreases. We've added senior people on top of the people we had when we didn't feel we were equipped with the right talent base to do the new things that we needed to do. We've also grown people aggressively internally. So really, in terms of the mix and match of how you build your people over 7 years, I feel like I've done quite a bit of those changes. And there have definitely been some really big challenges in our growth that comes down to what people's skill sets are versus their domain knowledge. That's a major kind of conversation that happens at Lighthouse all the time. And so to use an example that is not me personally, but really meets a lot of what we've dealt with, I introduce you to Angela. Angela is a CEO of a company, and Angela runs a warehouse distribution center. And since COVID, they've actually been slammed with online orders. But operations have been tough. And from marketing to HR, it's been hard to scale and learn. And she realizes that while her entire team is talented, none of them possess the data knowledge in order to sift through large data and make decisions. Okay, so you can see the general size of company we're talking about. Angela is based on a group of companies that we talk to and meet and see all the time. They're trying to scale, they're trying to grow, they're right at this sweet spot. What do they do when their talent isn't in the place they need to be? And I guess that's really the question around upskilling. This is where upskilling truly comes into play. It's not, people will talk to you about upskilling purely for the engagement and the support of your employees and to just make sure that they stay and they're retained. There is a big aspect of that. But really, the question is, can you bring people up in levels so that you can maintain what they do? Because Angela's got a decision to make. And the question is, should she replace her current team leads with department heads from other organizations, or she doesn't want to lose that current talent, but she wants to help maintain and build them? How is she going to upskill these people? And that is truly at the heart of making decisions around upskilling. I understand that there's a ton of other people that, or a ton of other thoughts that go into why people should learn. But really, it should be that you have a set of talent, and that talent is some of the most important people to the drive and growth of your company. And I have a few little pointers on that I think will make a big difference when you are thinking about this, because what we actually see at Lighthouse is that the problem is not usually our HR professionals that we talk to, and it is not L&D experts. The understanding of what learning can do on those fronts, I'm sure for everybody listening here today, that's the easiest one. The hardest one is your CEO. The hardest one is actually getting champions within your organizations who really want to drive this to the next step forward. It's one thing to nod heads and say, yes, learning is important. It's another to find a true champion on things like data knowledge. And one of the problems is, what is ROI on this kind of stuff? How do you prove it? So this is kind of what I wanted to break down for everybody really quickly, because it really does come down to either replacing people or upskilling them. So first, recruiting cannot be the only answer, especially during a time like COVID and what we're dealing with right now. Our program is we have our reskilling portion. It is not in my interest to say don't recruit, because we want you to hire all our graduates from our programs. But in reality, what you're looking at is some really base statistics that are really simple math that make recruiting a much more expensive proposition than constantly helping upskill your employees. First of all, it's institutional knowledge. You can find, if you wanted to hire people with base set of skills that older employees do not have, you could go get graduates from university programs, but you know they will not be ready with the skill set, with the domain knowledge that they need in order to use that skill set appropriately. So you tend to lose productivity, you tend to gain in cost, you tend to lose agility by bringing these people in and having to slow down at first, and you tend to gain bureaucracy because you're hiring often above the last people you have, and now you have more layers than ever, and layers that don't understand the layers below them. It is expensive. There is a limited talent pool, and there's a lot of people out there. Yes, there's a lot of people currently who are unemployed without jobs, but tell me that every HR person in this room doesn't get so frustrated when they have 3 times the volume of applicants and still only the 5% of actual talent that they need to see walk in the door, and you're all fighting over the same people. It's a real problem, and the problem is a skills gap. The problem isn't that there's not enough people who want to work at your company. The problem is where are they gaining the appropriate skills? And it is expensive to find the talent that has all the skills and institutional knowledge that you need. Higher turnover. There's a major turnover when it comes to people that you more recently recruited. The more you promote someone through your company, the more likely it is that you retain them for longer periods of time. There's tons of data on it. There's tons of statistics on it. So actually helping people learn within the company is a huge asset to the growth of your own people and maintaining them and keeping them and building a culture of retention. And lastly, it's high time to ramp. So you're dealing with a recruitment and onboarding process that at the minimum is 90 days. That's the minimum it usually takes. And we've seen 120, 180, depending on the skill set you're looking at. So overall, when you're thinking about training and rehiring, I think there is some pretty basic stuff that you can look at here. There's a $1,200 to $2,000 per employee cost in training. That's what you're looking at yearly if you want to do it well. And if we're looking at a lot of companies, we're seeing that that's generally the range of where they start to see effective outcomes through their upskilling, as opposed to a purely, here's some content. If you want to learn, there's a portal, learn all the things you want, but we're not really paying attention to it. You build increased loyalty, and overall, you're going to have better employee satisfaction. You're going to walk away with better retention, and you're going to have a better morale with your group, but you'll also have a lot less time lost. Your people gaining base skills like data make a huge difference into the insight that they can bring forward on the problems that they already understand are problems. They can bring predictive ideas around how they can improve your operations, improve your marketing, improve your HR, like all of you can. Arming people with the amount of data that is around them and the ability to manipulate it into the ways that make sense to solve problems, it arms them with information in a way that we are not properly utilizing, but is all very available. As opposed to the rehire side. And the rehire side is recruitment costs, as we know, can be extremely expensive. There's a loss of productivity, there's a loss of engagement, and there is a huge cultural impact on the organization in terms of bringing people in, especially when you're bringing them in at a higher level. Personally, at Lighthouse, we've actually recently dealt with this. So just to speak from a personal aspect, we did have to go and rehire some senior people. I'm not telling you that that's always a bad idea. We were really changing and adjusting our business actually to be focusing a lot more on the upskilling side. We brought in some senior people with the hope that those senior people would help our next level of people continue to grow because they were missing some of those skill sets. At the end of the day, we had a bunch of those people who previously were kind of leave our organization. We were ready for that and prepared. We understood the decision we were making. And in this particular case, it actually had to do with domain knowledge. The big thing was we were changing a little bit of our focus and we needed a different type of domain knowledge walking into our organization. But if it was purely based on skills, we would have never made that decision. And so that's something that I just really want to leave with people as we talk about future of work and the intersection for everybody and thinking about this kind of stuff. All I want to make sure that you're thinking about is that your employees will constantly need new skills, and that the solution of going and hiring out for those skills is a deep, dark jungle of likely unhappy results. Whereas upskilling within your own organization and really training people up has immense value to everybody and builds an incredible learning culture, and one that likely is going to be ready to continuously evolve with the changes around us, which is why we say our goal is to help people learn at the speed of life. And so I'll leave it there. Hopefully that was 8 minutes, and thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. And without further ado, I'm going to invite Roger to just follow right behind you as he talks about how technology has impacted benefits and wellness.
Thanks, Aldine. Thanks, Jeremy. I enjoyed that. I think the theme that we're probably going to see consistently across this time is growth and upscaling and upgrading. We're on a time where we can see the light, I think, in the pandemic, and it's time to kind of hit the gas. So that was a great start. I'm just going to share my PowerPoint and we're good to go. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay. All right. So I have a very quick amount of time to share some ideas with you. I'm definitely going to speak about the technology side, and I'm going to leave you some other things that I think are worthy of your attention. The quick little share I'll have, if I can get my slides to move. We do a lot of benefits and wellness audits and reviews for companies. And in the course of the last few years, there's been a few very consistent trends and themes from the people that we work with. our main report that we go to our senior HR and senior finance positions, whether they be internal or fractional in nature. And I'll just share with you quickly what we've seen very consistently. The first thing is that HR finance people feel like they just deserve a lot more help and support from their benefit consultant team. In order to accomplish what they want, they just need a lot more ideas and attention than they ever had before. They also feel like they want to work with and hire a consultant that they fit with best. So you can imagine, I'm sure you're sitting there, there are a lot of legacy relationships out there that are no longer a fit. The word on for most people is they want to break those up and start fresh with who fits best with them. And finally, no question about it, is they need to invest in employee health and well-being. We call that wellness, we call that prevention, or a more proactive approach to health. But there definitely is not only an urgency to this discussion, but there's also an understanding of the link between employee health and how engaged and how high performing that they are. So I thought I would share those themes with you. I'm sure many of those resonate with many of you. So today I'll quickly talk about technology and quickly how fast it's hit the benefit and wellness world. I want to caution you on the area of drug cost management, the opportunity of communication strategies and tools, and then a few thoughts about predictions for this year and beyond. So you probably are aware that pre-pandemic, a lot of family doctors were sending reconciliations and reports via fax. Until the pandemic, they were very happy to just settle with that same communication model. And the pandemic has put us 10 years ahead of where we were in terms of communication and management of patient experience. So great news that that's happened. And what it's also done, of course, because many of you have probably experienced this already, it's given you access to a way of diagnosis, to a form of treatment, and a way of navigating through the system. Most importantly, in the mental health arena, people now can figure out what their issue is, who they should be speaking to, and where the sort of path is towards treatment. That is all great news. The challenge with that, which I'm just going to share, is that if you're being managed by a family doctor, perhaps going through an employee assistance system, going through a digital tool, you're going to see that there's a push and a pull here in terms of the continuity of that care. That's what we have to figure out in the coming months and years to make sure that people don't get confused by the path that they're on. So that's a cautionary issue. And just to let you know, virtual health models up until the pandemic weren't really even on the radar for businesses as something that they felt they had to invest in. The truth is that these tools came about because insurance companies found a way to subsidize and pass these services along at a much lower rate than you would pay off as a regular direct customer. So thank goodness it's really brought the buying power to bear, and we now can take advantage of it. But we still have to reevaluate the business case of these tools from time to time. They're not, always everything people say they are. So with that, drug cost is going to be a challenge coming up. It has been, and it will be even further. What I'm suggesting is that you crash test your benefit plan to determine what it can absorb in terms of new high drug claims. We all understand pooling protection and stop loss protection, but a lot of us don't know what that would do to our plan if we had a series of new drugs coming through our plan. There are new drugs all the time for rare diseases that are very expensive. There are gene therapy drugs that are in the millions of dollars, and it's not necessarily the case that normal drug plans can cover them. So we're going to have to really pay attention to our formularies and determine what we're prepared to do for an employee. And that's what I refer to as the sort of social contract, is where is the line drawn between what an employer can manage and pay for versus what the responsibility is to the employee themselves. So definitely an area to be aware of is drug cost. from a communication standpoint, this is the big game changer for everything around benefits and wellness. You can have tools, you can have a plan, but if it doesn't get discussed and it doesn't get taught and reminded, it will sit in the background and it won't do what you need it to do. What I'm suggesting is have a strategy of how you communicate with employees and consider the various different tools that can work within that strategy. There's so much you can do. The bottom line outcome you're looking for that really determines if you have a great benefits and wellness program is, do people understand it? Do they appreciate it? And do they feel accountable as a consumer of their benefits in terms of the sharing of cost and the responsibility of being a good consumer? Keep that in mind in terms of measuring your success in the future of benefits and wellness, and think about how you might have a consistent education system and something much more transparent in terms of sharing what it costs you as an employer. That's very powerful. So if you focus on this in the next little while, it could be a great game changer as well. So lots of tools and things to share. I won't go through all this right now. If you want more help with this, please feel free to reach out. Now, as far as the go forward picture, I mentioned drug formulary and the fact that we are literally as employers going to have to start make decisions about what drugs are covered and which ones are not. And that's going to be tough, but it is something that you're going to want to talk to your consultants about now and think about sort of what you're going to do at that time. When it comes to wellness, regardless of all the technology tools that we now have, which are amazing and they're here to stay, those tools are not solutions in their own right. A wellness strategy is an incorporated approach that involves education, inclusion, discussion, and even feedback from employees about what they're concerned with. If you establish a great strategy with great long-term thinking, you'll be able to incorporate all these amazing digital tools and you will have some success. But if you just rely on the tools alone and expect them to do the job, you can realize that many of those will be hidden and forgotten soon after. The last sort of trend I would share is that benefits are becoming a much more personalized experience, whether it's genetic therapy and genetic testing to determine whether a drug is effective or not, whether if you're a diabetic or you're being treated for a certain disease state, you are going to start to notice that insurance companies are going to start to push education and material to you to help you through that management. So are you adhering to the medication? Are you getting cognitive therapy in addition to your medication? Because it really pays to see people as individuals and to guide them through that journey. So we're going to see a lot more of that in time to come. So I've tried to keep myself within the time limit. I look forward to all the questions later on. Thanks, Eldine.
Thanks so much, Roger. And I can see the faces looking very engaged, and I can sense there will be quite a few questions coming after your section here as we go into our panel discussion. So right now I want to welcome Brittany Taylor from Redmar Law. Welcome, Brittany.
Thanks so much, Eldine. I'm thrilled to be here. Great discussion so far. Very, very interesting topics. Usually when I do presentations like this, I'm with a bunch of other lawyers. So this is a very refreshing change of pace for me. So I want to talk to you today about health and safety obligations in the workplace. And some of this information is probably stuff that you've heard over and over again. Some of it is new stuff that we're still grappling with the recent changes that have been announced. But I'm going to try to give you a succinct summary of kind of where we're at right now. And, I know some people might be feeling like getting back to normal or returning to regular business operations seems really, really far away right now, especially with the new measures in place. But with vaccines on the horizon, it's not as far as it probably seems. And while businesses are continuing to operate even during the lockdown, we need to make sure that they're operating safely. And, for those businesses who can't operate in full right now, we need to make sure when they are able to return that they are doing so safely and that employers are making sure they're complying with their obligations and keeping their staff safe. So let's talk about the basics. And this is probably stuff that most of you are already familiar with. So we know that all employers have a duty to take reasonable steps to ensure the health and safety of their workers, right? And that's enshrined in different pieces of legislation depending on your jurisdiction. Here in Ontario, that's the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So employers who fail to provide employees with a safe working environment can be fined, and they can even serve jail time up to a certain point in certain circumstances. So this is a pretty significant obligations. Um, Employees have obligations under health and safety legislation as well, right? So they have an obligation to comply with the health and safety directives that are issued by their employer, to use personal protective equipment properly. And they also have rights under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, including the right to refuse unsafe work in order to keep themselves or others safe. So those are the basics. So let's take that framework and look at how COVID-19 has impacted how we deal with health and safety requirements in the workplace. So right off the bat, we know that the risk of contracting COVID-19 is a health and safety risk that employers have to take steps to mitigate against. Okay, so it's not enough to not do anything and to expect employees to manage their own health and safety. That is a failure from the perspective of the ministry of an employer to comply with their obligations under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Okay, so there is a positive obligation on employers to make sure that they're keeping their workers safe. The challenge for employers throughout this pandemic has been knowing what is enough in terms of action to protect their employees, right? And we're fortunate because the government has done a lot to try to give us some direction in this regard, right? So the Ontario government has created a resources to prevent COVID-19 page, which provides a lot of general information to employers on ensuring a safe work environment. So this includes things like ensuring masks are worn, disinfecting common areas, making sure commonly touched items are cleaned regularly, staggering shifts, staggering break times, working remotely. All of those things are, general health and safety measures that are being recommended. We also have sector specific guidance for certain workplaces. So, for example, retail stores are or were encouraged to require employees to or customers to prepay for items to minimize the contact between customers and employees. Okay, so lots of sector specific guidance as well. One of the requirements that we have seen and that some employers have struggled with is the requirement to prepare and make available a COVID-19 safety plan. And I think one of the reasons that people were confused about this is because they weren't sure if it was actually required. They weren't sure what they were supposed to do with it once they made it, and they weren't sure what it was supposed to include. The reality is that the government has provided a lot of resources in this regard as well, right? So, I mean, we understand that you have to create the plan if you're operating, particularly now during the lockdown. We also know that a copy of the plan has to be made available to any person for review upon request, and it should be posted. If your workplace is actually active and people are coming into the workplace, it should be posted in an area where people are going to be able to see it. It's going to come to their attention. Obviously, if everyone's working remotely, your safety plan might look very different than an organization who is currently operational. Essentially, what the safety plan is supposed to do is set out what steps the employer is going to take to prevent the spread of COVID-19. What's interesting about this is that the layout is already there for you based on what the government has recommended in terms of health and safety requirements and suggestions, both generally and from a sector specific perspective. So a lot of employers were confused about what it is they were supposed to put in this plan, but really it's just commenting on what are the requirements? How are we meeting them? What are the recommendations? How are we meeting them? What are any additional steps that we are taking to ensure that our workers are safe and that they're kept safe in the workplace? The other thing I'll note just quickly is that this is not something that needs to be filed with the ministry. Okay, so it's not something that, where proof is required, that you have to submit this or get it submitted for approval or anything like that. But it is something that's legally required. So not doing it is not really an option. And we'll talk about why it's not really an option in a little bit. Another requirement that I want to touch on quickly that did cause some alarm and confusion is this concept of mandatory screening, which is also designed to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and ensure health and safety of workers. So essentially, what this requirement is, which came in last year, is that all employees and essential visitors are required to be mandatorily screened before they enter the workplace. Okay, so the government actually created a screening assessment tool to assist with this. You don't have to use it because really the screening process is just 3 questions, right? So you don't have to use their questionnaire. You can make your own, put a fancy heading on it, whatever you want, as long as the questions are being asked and answered, right? And I think, one thing that immediately caused alarm was essential visitors. Does that mean all of our customers, everyone who potentially comes into the store, has to be screened in this way? And luckily, we got clarification on that almost immediately. So we know that essential visitors includes people providing a service to the workplace, such as couriers and maintenance individuals. It doesn't include customers, and it also doesn't include first responders if there's an emergency in the building. So the screening tool basically indicates that workers have to be screened at the start of their shift. Visitors have to be screened when they are arriving, whenever that is throughout the day. And as I said, it's really just 3 questions. So, whether the individual is experiencing any new or worsening symptoms of COVID, whether the individual's traveled outside of Canada in the last 14 days, and whether the individual has been in close contact with a confirmed or probable case of COVID-19. So if the individual answers no to all 3 questions, they are allowed to enter the workplace. It's safe for them to do so. If they answer yes to any of the questions, then they should not be permitted entry into the workplace. And for staff, this means what the government has recommended is sending them home and suggesting that they isolate until such time as they can either get a test done or isolate for the required 14-day period to make sure that they're safe. Okay, so this is all stuff that has been in place since before the latest lockdown. So let's talk about what has changed as a result of the lockdown. Okay, so as we know, as of January 12th, Ontario issued a declaration of emergency again. Okay, so we are once again back in a state of emergency. And this is going to last until at least or up until February 11th, 2021. It could be extended beyond that period of time. This declaration of emergency included a stay-at-home order, which basically says everyone is supposed to remain in their house except for essential or exceptional circumstances. And this includes personal essentials such as groceries, exercise, etc. But it also includes work that cannot be performed remotely. Okay, so that's an obligation imposed on individuals. There's a corresponding obligation imposed on employers, which essentially says any employee who is able to work from home must work from home. Okay, so it is in the discretion of the employer. A lot of people wanted to see a list of every single job that was permitted to work from home, and that's just not feasible. A lot of people have been upset that there wasn't a lot of direction in this regard, but frankly, I mean, there can be 10 vice presidents of a company and they would all have different job duties, descriptions, responsibilities. So it's not possible for the government to intervene in every single case and say, for sure, this is a job that can be done remotely. But what we do know just from the wording of the regulation and, the Q&As that the government has put out, it suggests that there is a strong encouragement on employers that if it's at all possible for somebody not to come into the workplace, that is what should be happening, right? That is the safest way to proceed. That is the only way that we can really truly guarantee health and safety of workers, is to have them working at home unless they really, really need to come into work. The other thing that the province announced is its Stay Safe All Day campaign, which will be administered by the Minister of Labor. And this is essentially also designed to further reduce the spread of COVID-19. And it's got basically 2 separate components. So the first is an educational component. So we can expect additional educational materials to be provided to employers on minimizing the risk of transmission. And they're really focusing on before, during, and after work. So before we had a lot of focus on just in the workplace, how do you stay safe? This is going to be a much more holistic view where they're looking at how do we keep employees safe through the whole period of time, before they get to work, during work, and after the workday has ended. Particularly, they're talking about break rooms here because we saw a huge amount of transmission occurring in break rooms, even though the rest of the workplace was complying with all restrictions that were necessary to ensure the health and safety of staff. So that's something that's going to be a huge focus. The second part of this is going to be inspection blitzes. Okay. And inspection blitzes are not a special COVID-19 thing. This is something that happens fairly regularly where the ministry announces it's targeting certain industries or certain sizes of employers to make sure that they're complying with health and safety or employment standards requirements. So this is just one of those blitzes. But in particular, what they're looking for here is making sure that workplaces are complying with health and safety recommendations. And if they're not, helping them to get up to where they need to be. Of course, that's the very nice approach. It can get worse from there, right? If you're not prepared to make changes, or if the violation is particularly egregious, that's when we get into things like enforcement, which can include ticketing. It can be ordering groups of people to disperse. It can be closing a premises if they really feel like the risk is just too high. It can also include fines, maximum fines for individuals up to 100,000, up to 10 million for a corporation. Okay, so these are not small fines that we're talking about. I also mentioned jail time at the start of introducing my my topic, which I always love to talk about jail time when I'm introducing my topic. But up to a year in jail is one of the consequences for breach of your requirements under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So those are the changes that we've seen since the lockdown was implemented. The one last thing I'm going to mention before I stop talking is a Toronto specific requirement. And this is a new reporting requirement for workplaces in Toronto who become aware of 2 or more cases of COVID-19 in their workplace. Okay, so as soon as an employer becomes aware of 2 or more cases within a 14-day span of time, they have an obligation, a positive obligation to report that to Toronto Public Health. Okay, so new reporting requirements being imposed as well. This one's location specific, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more locations follow suit from that. Okay, I've talked enough, so I'm going to stop for now and turn it back over to Aldine.
Thanks so much, Brittany. And I mean, as we listen, I'm sure there are lots more questions coming up. So just hang on to those questions. All our speakers are going to be hanging on for the panel discussion. So thank you very much, Brittany, for your presentation. And I'm going to invite right away Dean to share with us on his topic as well. I think Dean is probably bringing up his slide deck. All right, perfect. There we go. So Dean, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Aldine, and hello, everyone. My name is Dean Del Peach. I'm the Senior Manager of Talent and Diversity at Fix Software. As Aldine mentioned, play several different roles. I'm a professor at George Brown College, as well as I have my own consultancy called Stracity that focuses on helping companies build their diversity strategy, along with education and training and workshops. Just want to, first of all, mention how excited I am to be a part of Hacking HR and everyone that's a part. And also want to thank my fellow speakers. We've heard some wonderful speeches today, and I'm really glad to be a part of this. So let's talk about when diversity meets recruitment. So let's meet Katori. Katori Abuse is a female identified Indigenous Canadian who's been working as a software developer in a small startup. She landed this role straight out of school and has been working for over 5 years. She loves her culture and discusses it proudly. And in her role, she's a strong performer. She's well liked by her peers. But unfortunately, due to the global pandemic, as Brittany mentioned, her company has had to reduce staff and she's currently laid off. So as she sets out to reapply, she sees quite a few job postings that she seems to be qualified for, but doesn't necessarily feel like she has all the skills required. She decides she would have a better chance applying for a role that she's 100% qualified for. As she applies, she notices that she receives rejection after rejection notice. Not receiving any bites, she decides to change the name on her resume to her pet name, Amanda. And she resends her resume to the exact same jobs and notices that companies start calling her for interviews. She attends some interviews that seem promising, only to be told that she has good skills, yes, but she's not the right fit for the culture. Now, I want to say this, that too many skilled and qualified candidates from diverse backgrounds and experiences are being rejected through our recruitment processes due to hiring biases that may arise. And it's possible that we may be rejecting some candidates who bring innovation and creativity to our products. So let's talk about the business case, first of all, for diversity. McKinsey in 2015 did a study called Diversity Matters. And in the study, what they noticed is that companies in the top quartile of gender diversity were 15% more likely to have financial returns that were above the national industry mean. And then companies in the top quartile of racial and ethnic diversity were 35% more likely to have financial returns above their national industry median. And then they also noticed this, that companies with 10% higher gender and ethnic racial diversity on management teams and boards had in the US 1.1% greater profitability and 5.8% greater profitability in the UK. They had several other statistics, but one that really pops out is that companies in the bottom quartile for both gender and ethnic and racial diversity were statistically less likely to achieve above average financial returns than that of the average companies in the data set. And really what this tells us is that they weren't leading, they were actually lagging. And so I want to give you 4 different thoughts to consider to add to your recruitment process or think about as we want to create greater diversity in all of our teams and our organizations. The first one is our job descriptions. Research tells us that male applicants will apply to roles even if they only have 60 to 70% of the qualifications, whereas female applicants will typically apply to positions if they know they possess 90 to 100% of the qualifications listed, similar to the story we talked about with Katori. So one thing that we can do as employers is we can optimize our job descriptions to ensure that we clarify what's a must-have and what's a nice-to-have. A lot of times our job descriptions have about 10 or so responsibilities, and we want the Porsche in life when all we truly need is someone who has the top 5. Clarifying goes a long way, and it actually encourages applicants, especially female-identified applicants, to apply to jobs. What about using gender-neutral words in your job descriptions, for example, versus using masculine or feminine-focused words? Let's consider, instead of using, we are looking for a strong and dynamic leader, why don't we say we're looking for someone who is exceptional? And what this can do, just the choice of changing words can literally open up the pool of candidates for, the right skill and qualified talent to apply to our jobs. Also, too, a lot of our job postings at the end have a little statement at the end that says, please let us know if you require accommodations during the interview process. Now, that's a fantastic statement to have, but have you ever thought about creating what I call an equity statement? An equity statement is a statement at the end of your job description that encourages people to apply. I won't read the whole statement, but I will mention one portion that says this: if your experience is close to what you see listed here, please still consider applying. Diversity of experience and skills combined with passion is a key to innovation and excellence. Therefore, we encourage people from all backgrounds to apply to our positions. At Fix, what we decide to do is we decide to track everyone who applies and track whether this equity statement had any effect on their application. And here's what we found. Over 51% of the applicants coming into our pipeline and into our recruitment process, they said that the equity statement actually influenced their decision to apply. And an additional 21% indicated that it somewhat influenced their decision to apply. So imagine if we didn't have this equity statement, how many candidates we possibly may have lost in our process because they felt like this was not the right opportunity for them. Let's talk about pipelining for diversity. Obviously, the the different areas of pipelining that are listed here are things that we typically may do, such as job boards, networks, and sourcing. And Jeremy spoke about using Lighthouse Labs as a resource to find the best candidate. And I totally agree. And that's why I wanted to mention this: having partnerships and networks. Finding the right partnerships for your organization is absolutely crucial. Some partnerships we could consider as partnerships that may be focused on the LGBT community, or partnerships focused on Black professionals. We can think about so many different partnerships that we can be a part of. Also, using your social and your digital channels to really support your recruitment efforts, because there's a talent pool out there that may not know who you are, but with the right branding, you can reach a talent pool with diverse experience and diverse backgrounds. Let's talk about the two in the pool methodology. And this methodology is based on a research study by Stephanie Johnson. What she identified is that in the candidate pool of finalists, if you have one woman or one racialized person, the likelihood of them being hired is 0. But if you have at least 2 women in your finalist pool, the likelihood of hiring them increases by 79.14%. And if you have at least 2 racialized people in your candidate pool, the chances of hiring goes up to 193.72%. And one interesting point is that the pool size could be 4, it could be 6, it could be 8, it doesn't really matter. On average, the results are the same. So imagine applying this to your recruitment process, ensuring that there is greater gender diversity and greater racial diversity in your process. And finally, structured interviewing. One thing that we can consider is how we review our resumes. We could use AI tools to remove names to reduce bias, or have multiple people review resumes to ensure that you're bringing in the right talent for your roles. Consider situational exercises and simulations. For example, in software development, you can consider doing pairing exercises versus a technical test, or you can consider in sales using presentation skills as something that you can do. But putting candidates in real situations helps you to identify and understand their skills. And you're not looking for perfection, but you're looking to see how people think and approach ideas. What about structured interviewing? Having an evaluation process where you ask candidates questions and you evaluate their questions with a score to understand, how their skills played out in the actual interview. And what you might notice is that you may have a candidate such as Katori, who scores 4 out of 4, and then you have another candidate such as Fred, who scores 2 out of 4. And if your hiring manager decides that they want to move forward with Fred, as a recruiter or as a recruitment advisor, you can always talk to your hiring manager about why they're choosing that person and give them advice to let them know that maybe that might not be the best fit for the role. And then finally, diversify your hiring teams and make sure that your teams are cross-functional. Bring in new people from different areas of your company to have different perspectives on candidates in your hiring process. I end by saying this: our world is changing, and I believe it's time to move the dials on our boardrooms so that we could change them from looking like this to looking like this. A place and a world where diversity is the new normal. Hey, listen, thank you so much to Hacking HR for having me, and I'd love for you to connect with me on all my social media channels, and I'll hand it back to Aldine.
Thanks so much, Dean, and really, really thoughtful presentation here. We're collecting all your questions, we're seeing the questions, and we have Bobby who's going to be joining us now. And right after Bobby, we invite you to stay tuned as we have our panel discussion. We'll bring back all the speakers that have shared so far, including Bobby as he's getting ready to join us. So please don't go anywhere. Our panel comes back and keep sharing your questions, and we look forward to answering those shortly. And if you're catching the replay of this, please feel free to reach out to any of our speakers, whether it's on LinkedIn or on social media, and engage them as well. So without further ado, Bobby, we invite you to the big screen.
Great, thank you so much, and very excited to be here. Thank you kindly for inviting me to this. I'm very excited to share some awesome content with you. And what I'm going to talk about today actually is I'm going to talk about I mean, personal branding is definitely something I talk about, but my focus today is a great segue from the previous presentation on diversity inclusion, is the power of storytelling. And I want to talk about how storytelling matters for diversity inclusion. And it's actually going to be related to personal branding, as you'll see, but that's going to be my focus today. So, and if you have a question on this, I'm looking forward to hearing what you all have to say. So let's get right into this. I don't think you see my slide. And the main reason why storytelling is so important, particularly when you're trying to build more diversity inclusion in your workspace, is because it compels people and cultures and everyone to change in terms of how they feel, how they think, how they act, and how they behave. And that's a really big thing that we're trying to do here. So, the first question I ask people is, what does storytelling mean to you? And most people will say that it's a way to. I see stuff. People are asking me to go in presentation mode. So, is that not what I'm doing? Just want to make sure I got this properly.
Bottom right hand corner, you can tap the little bot. Yeah, keep going down.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Right there. Yeah.
Whoops, my bad. Yeah, no, I got it. My bad.
No, you're all good.
Normally I would do that. So okay. Okay, it's
Bobby's
okay.
ready.
So
He's really excited to share, man.
I know, I'm too excited. I can't help it. So, when I ask people what does storytelling mean to you, I mean, the things people come up is, it's a way to communicate. It's a way to express your values. It's a way to bridge humanity. And I find storytelling just a really compelling thing that's been going on for the rest of our entire lives since the history of mankind. And so it's really important to know how storytelling works. And you may tell stories on stage, you may tell stories online, on your company page. I mean, you may do videos, you may do it at networking events, but stories are everywhere. And so, when you talk about your story, it's important to know what that is. So, what is your story? And the science behind storytelling is actually quite amazing because according to science, the dopamine that's released tells us that when you experience an emotionally charged event, it makes it easier to remember the event with a higher accuracy. And then the cortex also gets activated. 2 areas of the brain are activated, and then the motor cortex and the frontal cortex, and that is designed to create longer lasting impressions with your stories. So let me tell you a quick story, okay? So one time I was at a wedding, and it was my good friend, and I met this beautiful woman who was there, and she was really, really awesome. And we connected on some really amazing things, such as musical theater and Monty Python and Star Trek. And I decided, we should maybe connect and talk a bit more. And next thing you know, we decided to make it official. But we had challenges. I had a family that was a different culture and different religion, and it was very difficult for us to get them to accept us. And there was a culture clash there, communication clash. But by talking to them and expressing our values of love, family, respect, and religion, and by having a deep conversation and taking that challenge, we were able to actually convince them to get on board. And next thing you know, we had a beautiful brown wedding, as I call it, and now we have beautiful beige babies. And the lesson of the story, of course, is that if you express values and you have families and parents who love you, they will come around. Now that's a very, it's a 30-second story, but in that story, I told you a lot of stuff. Imagine if I told a 5-minute story versus a 30-second story. The stories are a way for you to create imagery and emotion. You may understand someone who's been through this. You may feel the same way because you know about mixed relationships. You relate it to your own experience of what you've been through, whether it's talking to your parents, whether it's having a culture clash, and ultimately you're saying more than you're saying. Your stories display your values, your beliefs, and your culture, and that's why it's important for individuals and organizations to embrace storytelling as a powerful tool to create a sense of belonging, inclusion, and community. And storytelling is important for your business or brand. We know that business decisions are not based solely on logic. When you tell a story with data, you create a shared human experience. We know that numbers are not memorable, but stories are. And stories engage your audience beyond the facts. The brain processes images 60 times faster than words, and they make for better business arguments. It's a strong marketing strategy because it's the backbone of clearly communicated stories. It's human and profitable because heartfelt storytelling is both. Storytelling is a competitive advantage for individuals in the workplace as well as your organization. And ultimately, stories emotionally connect and create brand loyalty. And so I'm a big believer in putting your business and brand stories online, whether it's as an organization, as a team. I always tell people that they should always be putting things on LinkedIn. It's a huge part of it. So the question then becomes, what is holding you back from storytelling effectively now? Well, again, if we had time for Q&A, most people would say things like, well, I don't know what my brand is. I don't know what my values are. I don't know what I should share, or I'm just too afraid to start. What if people will judge me? And they have all these different reasons for holding themselves back without actually just starting the conversation, which again is the most important piece. Now, as it relates to storytelling, diversity, equity, inclusion, we already had people talk about that, and it was great. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but when we look at the diversity of people and perspectives, including people's voices and making them part of the organizational culture, and eventually turning that into results from policy, practice, and position, that stories will actually help us get there in a much more human and effective way. So why diversity, equity, inclusion stories? Well, there's a few reasons. Number one, connection. So if we want to translate across the communication disconnects in the organization, across teams, across individuals, it allows us to also translate across the biases that separate everyone and all the different professional disciplines. Number one. Number two, awareness. We want to let people know of the stories that the employees and clients really need to hear from us, that are out there and that are being hidden within our hearts and our souls and our minds. DEI stories are a pathway to inclusion because oftentimes these stories have a lesson or a moral or a call to action. In my story about me and my parents, one of the things the lesson was, when you talk with certain values and there's a lot of love, people, they will come around. So most stories have a call to action, and that's a pathway to inclusion. Validation. So if you allow for people to have more DEI stories, people and employees feel valued as an individual at the work. And then belonging. The most important piece is you're creating a sense of connection and belonging through storytelling and a sense of community. So the key takeaway for DEI stories is that all your stories will greatly enhance the culture and the impact of your organization. And what's really powerful here is if you look at the whole inclusion, diversity, equity, if you start telling stories about diversity and you start to see the multiple identities that are represented in an organization, and you start to tell even more stories around inclusion where all the thoughts, ideas, and perspectives of all individuals are starting to matter and people feel like they matter, then we start to have the most important piece, which is belonging. An organization that engages full potential of the individual, where innovation thrives and views, beliefs, and values are integrated. And that's why storytelling is so powerful to get to that point. And when I talk about storytelling, the focus is really twofold. Like when I try to help people with stories and really try to empower them to tell better stories, to have the confidence to tell stories, to just start telling branded, aligned, focused, and impactful, emotionally resonating stories. There's two pieces to consider. Number one, to empower you as the leader of the organization or the leader within the organization, to help you build confidence and capability as you share your stories around diversity, equity, inclusion. Things you've experienced, things you've felt, things you've learned. This is a chance for you to take that and embed the culture from a top-down level. But the second piece is to empower your employees. You need to create some sort of avenue where you can encourage your employees to share their own stories. It could be in your team meetings. It could be in a monthly or quarterly meetup. It could be an initiative that's specifically DEI related to help share those stories of diversity, equity, inclusion, because that will add it to the community. It creates a greater sense of belonging and a more inclusive culture. So you want to do both empowering yourself and empowering your employees. And I'm really big on talking about thought leadership branding, which I've done in many other presentations. But when you look at the three main criteria steps of thought leadership branding, one is building deep and broad relationships. The other one is mastering public speaking, communication skills, so writing and speaking. But the second was creating and generating awesome ideas and content. If you invest in that to build better stories, you're going to build a thought leadership brand culture with your leaders and your employees in your organization. And storytelling helps all three areas. When you tell better stories, you're better at having meaningful connections. When you tell better stories, you're better at creating ideas and content. And when you tell better stories, your speaking communication skills improve incredibly. Now, what if I haven't done any thought leadership brand building around diversity, inclusion, or a storyteller? Well, there's a great quote. If you have to be different, but greater first. If you're not first, you can still be different. You can still be great. So you just have to start. You can also leverage a storytelling with all your content. So, I also do a training on LinkedIn, and I talk about how I love LinkedIn. Are you sharing stories on LinkedIn around diversity and inclusion with individuals in the organization or yourself? Whether you're doing video or long form posts or articles or short form posts, it's a way for you to tell stories around who you are, who your team is, why your organization is doing what they're doing, and the results that they're getting. We already heard some great stories before about diversity and inclusion. So those stories are things I think could be on LinkedIn, which right now is the largest professional platform with the best organic traffic. And if I were to give you top 5 storytelling tactics for your diverse people in your organization, number 1, immerse your audience in the story. Don't just tell them, show them exactly where they are, what were the feelings, what are the tactiles and kinetic aspects of the look and feel of the story. Get them really involved. You show, don't tell. So instead of using words to just talk about one thing, you describe it in great detail. Number 3, tell a personal story. Studies show that vulnerability actually has a much better impact in connecting with an audience. Number 4, structure simple sizzle and soulful steak. So oftentimes there used to be this thing where it's the sizzle or the steak, but actually it should be both. The sizzle is making it exciting for people, but the steak is the heartfelt, deep-rooted foundation of great storytelling. And then ultimately, if you want to be really good at this, you have to practice, rehearse, and hone your craft. And again, it may not go great the first time, but the third, fourth time, it gets comfortable. By the 5th, 6th time, you're starting to really improve. And by the 7th or 8th time, you're starting to really get out there and make an impact with people. So build a database of stories, practice, and impact. So now let's say you've mastered the art of storytelling. How would that feel to you as an individual in your organization? How would your organization benefit from having mastered storytelling and spreading it with your employees? And what would your life look like now that you feel comfortable sharing your story? If you think about that, you're going to find that it's going to make everything better. Your work will be better, your team will be better, and your company will be better. As I always say from a leadership standpoint, a better you is a better everything else. So that's why we say invest in storytelling as one of the key thought leadership skills that you need to work on. And again, I know it might be hard to do these stories, but again, you can either be reacting to change, or you can embrace the change, or you can create the change you want in your organizations, in your culture, and in yourself as an individual. So I think that it's important for everyone to build their stories now. Think about your top 5 to 10 stories in your life. What are your top 5 to 10 work stories you love to talk about? What are some personal stories you love to talk about? What are some people stories of people you know or your friends? And right away, you have a database of 15 to 30 stories you can leverage anytime you want in your meetings, in your workplace, with your fellow colleagues, and build a library of really great stories. Although I do recommend that everyone work on their own 3-minute life story that's aligned with their brand and who they are, but also think about what are some stories that specifically relate to diversity, equity, inclusion, and that whole and the whole idea of creating inclusion and belonging. And remember, your story is your brand, and your brand is your story. As a personal branding advocate, I cannot express this enough. With my organization, DYPB, we focus on individual organizations who want 3 things. And we found through both 15 years of studies and analytics and qualitative studies that there's 3 things that personal branding gives you. Number 1, it gives you more focus, some more clarity, direction, and purpose with everything, with your career path, with your business journey, with your storytelling. It gives you more alignment. So your life has more meaning. There's more values activation. There's more passion fulfillment of what you're doing. And when you have more focus and alignment, then you have more impact, greater results, success, story, and legacy. And that's why when we work with people on personal branding, that's a key part of actually building a strong story, because you want to discover your brand, then design, deliver on that brand and those stories out there. And we use a personal brand model to explain how this all works, because most people are here. They're always designing, they're developing, strategizing, and trying to figure out the target audience. And what they don't do is they don't do the deep dive work, which is the commitment to self-analysis, identifying and exploring and crafting their brand. And they do all this stuff, the design stuff first, without actually doing the discovery piece. So I encourage people, organizations, and individuals to actually do the discovery piece and explore and craft that more aligned, purposeful target. Because then when you design something, instead of having 60% alignment, you have 85 or 90% alignment or more. And then you can go out there and deliver those stories. When I usually work with people too on their brand story, one of the things that I talk for diversity inclusion, we focus on a personal brand framework and then a story framework to help tell more resonant stories out there in the marketplace or within the organization. So how to empower your employees' diverse voices? Well, you want to invite every voice. people will shine when thrust to the forefront if you just give them a chance and give them the support and create a culture where everyone, no judgment, everyone's included, everyone's supported, and that can be a really powerful way to do that. Ensure everyone feels like they belong. True belonging means every individual voice is heard. So if someone's not heard, there's already a sense of belonging that's missing. And so it's important for you to make sure everyone feels like they're belonging, even if they don't want to share the story just yet. Amplify diversity of thought and experience. Give people the opportunity to actually not only share the stories, but also have opportunities for more diverse thought and experience, because without it, nothing will change in the organization. And then go beyond your comfort zone. Break through the ceiling of your own set limits to help others break through theirs. So once you take on the challenge to build your own diverse voice and tell those stories, other people in the organization are also going to step up and feel really good about what you're trying to do. So some final thoughts before we end off here. So, I mean, this quote is amazing, but ideally, the idea of telling stories and the idea of diversity, equity, inclusion is to make people feel good, to make people feel heard, to make people feel like they belong. And if you do that, that's when the magic happens in the organization and your productivity and the loyalty and the culture of the organization. And I know you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. If you're willing to start and do the work and align your brand and start telling stories and create that culture in the workplace, that's when you start to really make a difference. Whether you're an individual or an organization, just start and you can start to be great. And I mean, that's my time. Thank you so much for that. If you have any questions or you want to reach out to me, you can look at my website, dypb.ca, or you can join me for the other work that I'm doing out there. Contact me anytime on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. I'm pretty much everywhere under the Rayhan Bobby handle. And now I'm on Clubhouse, which just started. So thanks so much for that. Really appreciate your time. And I look forward to any questions after we finish off with the presentations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bobby. That was very insightful. And I truly believe, vulnerability breeds vulnerability. So how wonderful. If you can just take that first step and feeling a little bit more vulnerable, you can step in the right direction. Wonderful. So I appreciate all the questions that are coming in, and we are going to tackle a few of those now. We do have about 10 to 15 minutes to do so. So we're going to get to it. This is a panel discussion, so anyone can weigh in. We do have some directed questions to certain speakers, but again, everyone has some really great thought leadership here, so please speak up. So first we have for Jeremy a question on what are some strategies I could use to get employees to engage with learning more, especially when they are complaining about time being used. Now, I just want to preface it. We had another question about how many hours do you think employees should be, using learning and development during the year? Do you have any stats on that? So if they're complaining about how many hours, and then how can we get employees to be engaged about it?
Okay, well, thanks so much for asking me those questions. Great questions, and ones that I think I'll also direct you to some resources that I think would be even more helpful in driving those conversations. So one is there's a LinkedIn Learning Report. The LinkedIn Learning Report was a phenomenal report that came out, and the stat that I'd probably quote in there that's most important is 30% of millennials, which I assume is a lot of employee bases, it's the 23 to 38, I believe, is the age range. 37% of them say that if their managers actually kind of engaged with the learning they were doing and actually recognized it at all, they would be learning twice as much as they're currently learning. That stat alone probably says more than any other stat I've seen, which is recognizing what is going on within the learning of your organization, treating it as important, making sure that managers are having conversations about it, and actually making both the manager and the employee think about it, how it drives productivity and ROI, and not just learning for the sake of learning, is of huge value if you want people to take their learning seriously. The other part is I wouldn't start with the people who are struggling the most to decide to do this and don't necessarily want to do that, but I would definitely create a lot of champions in your organization from the people who are open and engaged to it. But again, need that recognition, and more importantly than anything, they just need the time from the manager to think about how their learning will connect to direct results. In terms of hours spent, I'll direct you to Josh Burson. He's got some great talks. I'm sure a lot of HR professionals are very comfortable and aware of him. And, especially the whole learning within the flow of work aspect that he talks about. He has a great chart on kind of hours that should be spent for learning. So, personally, I think 5-6 hours a week is what's kind of talked about on a regular basis. But then again, where I come from, I think that's a lot of hours. So I actually would put it back to your teams and say, how effective are you working on your learning? What is the effective learning method of delivery that you're looking at? Because it shouldn't be about amount of time. It should be about effective learning that drives results for both employee and company as much as possible, which sometimes can be very creative. I mean, we had somebody who did a pottery course while at Lighthouse and connected it to their learning. But the real reason was because they were lacking creativity. They needed to try something a little bit different, and just doing something that took them out of their normal element and built it in was something that they were working on. If I can connect that and talk about that, I can talk a little bit more about those results. Now, that's not something Lighthouse teaches. I can't tell you the direct ROI and outcome of it, but I think even that conversation was very important. So I'll leave it there and say I think those two probably speak for themselves.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That's great insight. And I totally concur on, sending out a survey, a learning and development survey, and asking your team what they value and what they need. It's going to be a little bit different for everyone. And that's great. Does anyone have any other weigh-ins on this? You don't have to. And I'll let Aldine take the next question.
Awesome. So this one might spark a little bit more conversation. What questions do I need to ask my leadership to determine what ratio of upskilling to reskilling I should include in our training, development, and learning strategies and plans? Jeremy, that one was for you.
I thought I saw Brittany raise her hand. Brittany,
yes.
Are you raising your hand?
No.
Oh, okay.
My dog's trying to join the conversation. That's unrelated.
Excellent. I'd be interested in your dog's opinion.
I was just going to say that.
So I think first and foremost, it starts with what are the positions that you see most needing to be filled in the next 2 years of work, which a lot of, the first thing you'll find is a lot of companies don't know how to answer that, at which point as an HR professional, actually helping drive that conversation is hugely helpful towards everyone from your COO to your CEO to your CFO. Better planning around positions and people and skills is important. The second, are the biggest gaps in your leadership teams around, and your general management teams around the skills that are necessary, because those are often the people who have to think about those skills for everybody else. So considering what skills are needed, you can run things like skills assessments and understand where those gaps are. I think those are just interesting exercises to go with. But I would really start with taking a look and making a constant conversation and build a cadence of conversation around what are the roles that we're going to grow into, what are the kind of things we're going to want to see. If automation is at all being brought up as an important part of your company's future in the next 2 years, you can basically take everything from coding to data to digital literacy, circle it, and just say almost everyone is going to need to learn to engage with that better, because as soon as half a team is good at that and half isn't, there's a problem. When it comes to reskilling, that one's a really big one and really represents how much you are willing to transition people completely into other roles. I find companies like Amazon and groups like that tout it and talk really positively about it. We love it, but it's a pretty expensive, it's a different endeavor than upskilling. And so just breaking off those two things, I think if you want to know reskilling versus upskilling, what the budgets are going to look like for that as well, very important.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Good points there, Jeremy.
Really great. Okay, we're going to jump into another question. This one's for Roger. We have, you mentioned that there are a ton of digital health tools to choose from. Yes, there are. How does a company choose, compare, and evaluate those? Great question.
Yeah, and it's a tough one because a lot of these tools are really thrown at us right now as an inclusive part of an existing carrier offering. So we take them and we use them, but they haven't truly been out long enough necessarily to be evaluated by the masses, right? So that means that there has to be some caution around them, and not necessarily just a leave it and set it and leave it alone approach to it. That's why I'm a big believer that these tools require you to take responsibility on the overall wellness strategy, not just settle on the tool itself. So truly, again, it's early days. Some of these tools have been getting huge reviews and raising a lot of money to up their game and put them out to the masses. But we have taken a role of just kind of guiding people slowly towards the solution and what to choose, whether it's an assessment tool, whether it's actually a treatment tool like an ICBT tool. The virtual medical ones, again, are being thrown in as an addition, so you kind of get what you get. But how do we educate the employee on how to use them and to be knowledgeable about it, and realizing that it's not the only solution, it's a complement. So virtual solutions are a complement to live. Nothing beats live counseling. Any counselor will tell you that as a consistent form of treatment. But we're happy to have these, and we're going to take advantage of them. We just have to be sort of, again, cautious is the word I would use. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I like the word that you use, strategy, focusing on the strategy as a whole to help you kind of navigate those selection processes.
Yeah, it's easy to get carried away and jump to the first sexy tool that's in front of you, but truly take a breath, get some advice, and it'll probably pay off in the long run.
For sure. And I think that's a great segue into another question that we got here. What are some of the strategies that HR teams can use to increase plan usage without significantly increasing benefit costs? So, you know, employees are like, we want to use more benefits. HR is like, the business like, it's very expensive. We can't afford it if the usage goes up. So
yeah.
What are some of the strategies you've come across or recommend to your clients to get greater plan usage without, you know, seeing an astronomical benefits bill at the end of the year?
Yeah.
Or increase?
I think with more flexibility in plans comes more responsibility, as they say, or I said it at least. So, you know, you give employees this massive gamut of choice on what they can use, or you give them spending accounts. You also have to show them how to be a good consumer. So use what you need, but be aware that this costs us a certain amount of money. It creates a different kind of mindset when people go out and use benefits. They don't think of it as, let me burn through what I can and I'll take advantage of an insurance company. The more an employer can say, listen, we pay and we fund every dollar of these claims at the end of the day. And what we'll do is we'll teach you how to get better deals for your glasses, how to ask your practitioners whether a next treatment is necessary, whether you should be referred down the hall to the next practitioner, and so on. How to ask your dentist to explain the codes. And beware, when you go back to the dentist very soon, you're going to have a lot of codes on there. You're not going to know what they are. So ask, how does this add up? So it's that consumer awareness and consumer responsibility that I think balances out the sort of usage issue or the concern of overutilization. That would be my comment on that.
Awesome. Does anyone else have anything to weigh in on that comment or question? No? All right. I'm going to keep moving forward. And Brittany, we have a few questions. Of course, everyone's
quite a few.
So first off, from just a legal perspective, what do I do if an employee objects to working for safety reasons?
Yeah, and this is a great question, and one that we were getting a lot at the start of the pandemic, and then it kind of died off a bit, but we're expecting and we're seeing it more and more because we've got these new restrictions, right, of who is permitted to come into work, what work has to be performed in the workplace, and what should be performed at home. And so we've got people now with this, again, having this opportunity to say, hold on a second, I don't think I should be working at the office. I think my job can be done remotely. And why is it that I'm being asked to come into the office? So we're expecting employees to be going to the ministry with these types of complaints, which is the same thing as a refusal to work because the workplace is unsafe. They're essentially saying, I don't think I should be required to go in from a safety perspective. So what does an employer do? I think the number one most important thing that every employer needs to recognize right off the bat is it's not up to them to decide whether or not the workplace is safe, right? So the first step that an employer is going to do when they receive this objection to coming into work, whether it's I don't think my job should be requiring me to come into work, whether it's I agree I should be required to come in, but I don't think you're doing enough to keep me safe. the first thing that an employer should be doing is seeing if they can fix the problem, right? So they take that information away, they look at their workplace, they assess their policies, they make a determination if there's anything that can or should be changed. Then they go back to the employee with that information and say, here's what we've done, or here's what we have, and we think it's sufficient already. Does that resolve your issue? And if the answer is no, if the employee says, no, I still don't feel safe working, that's when the ministry has to get involved. Okay, so that's when the employer is reaching out to the Ministry of Labor and saying, I need an inspector to be the impartial decision maker in this regard of whether or not the workplace is truly safe. And we saw a lot of that happening again at the start of the pandemic. And most of these decisions, the huge majority, were in favor of the employer. Okay, so there was a lot of sympathy to employers trying to figure out what it was that they had to do, making sure they were complying with their requirements. So we saw a lot of sympathy for the employer in that circumstance. It is going to be interesting to see if that's going to be the case with this latest round, simply because the regulation, as I suggested, does indicate more pressure on employers to keep employees out of the workplace if at all possible.
Wonderful. Okay. And this is going to add on to that a little bit. But what do I do as an employee if I believe my job can be done remotely, but my employer does not?
Right, right. And this is exactly the situation that I
The
expect
other
we're going to
side
see
of the
quite a
of the
bit of.
coin, right?
Exactly, the other side of the coin. And I think the answer is basically, it follows from the answer I just gave, which is, you kind of have two options as an employee who's faced with that kind of problem. You can go directly to the ministry and say to them, listen, my employer is requiring me to work. I don't think I should be having to come into the office. I think I can do my job remotely, and have an inspector make that determination. I mean, I think as a first step, what most people should do if they're comfortable doing it is actually talk to the employer first and explain why they feel like they shouldn't be required to come into the office. In particular, if there's other issues going on here, right? Because it's a very different situation if you have an employee who's saying, I don't think I'm required to come in because of just the nature of my job, versus somebody who's saying, I can't come in, I'm concerned about safety because I have a pre-existing health condition, right? Or because I have to take care of my kids who are home for school right now, right? So though that's a different conversation, but both in my mind should initiate by having that conversation with the employer.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's
I
very
was just going to add in on that too, Laura, just to kind of bring in the DE&I lens. I remember earlier or later last year, there was an article that I believe went out and talked about the disproportionate impact on men versus women with, working from home. So, just trying to bring in some additional thoughts here. How does that really play out in an employer situation where you may have a single mom or a single dad, or maybe even both parents who are now working from home, who are saying, listen, I need this flexibility because I can't access childcare, or, schools are now online. I can't send my kid to school. How do we balance accommodation, what's reasonable, what's not, when we actually know as the employer that they're not going to be working a full 8 hours, right?
Right.
Let's be honest. But then on the other side, we can't mandate them to send their kids to daycare or find alternative childcare, because in a lot of instances that's just not available. So how do you recommend, HR professionals as well as, business owners navigate that kind of accommodation situation, being very sensitive to the different needs, of the employees, whether male, female, in that scenario?
Right. I mean, great question. And I think the biggest piece of advice that I would give to employers is never make a knee-jerk reaction, right? You always want to think about a request for accommodation. You always want to make sure you have all the information that you need to make a decision. You have to keep in mind that family status, being in a parent-child relationship, having family obligations, that is a protected ground under the Human Rights Code. So it does trigger your duty to accommodate. And that duty goes goes up to the point of undue hardship, which is a very, very high burden for an employer to meet. So my advice to employers throughout this pandemic has been be flexible where you can, right? And I think that goes back to what a lot of the other speakers have said about retaining people, and keeping your talent. Part of that is how you react to situations that are occurring given the pandemic. How do you respond to situations of craziness and unprecedented situations occurring? How do you respond? How do you take care of your staff in that situation? From a legal perspective, it's really no different than if somebody requests accommodation for family status outside of the pandemic. The only thing that we know is that the government has been very clear about parents having the right to choose whether to send their child to daycare or school or keep them at home, right? So the government has been very clear that you cannot expect a parent to send their child back to school just because schools are open, right? That is a personal choice that a parent should be making. And thankfully the government did provide that clarification, because otherwise you would be asking the question of, how can I accommodate this person? Do I have to agree to their schedule? Are there other methods available? Because one of the most important things to remember as an employee is that you're not entitled to the accommodation of your choice. You're entitled to reasonable accommodation. So the only thing that you can do is tell your employer what you need, and then it's on them to try to come up with a reasonable way that they can accommodate you that meets those limitations and restrictions. And that doesn't necessarily mean getting exactly what you were looking for. Sometimes, it's what you need in order to comply with those restrictions and limitations, not necessarily what you want or what your preference is.
That's really insightful. And I do always keep kind of like the idea of respond, not react, is really important. And react with flexibility, inclusivity, because everyone's going to be different. And we tend to have some biases based on our personal situations. So really flexibility, inclusivity, and at the end of the day, empathy.
Yeah.
It goes a long way in this very strange time that we're living in.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to find out if Dean wanted to add a lens to that, because I know even with, jobs changing and employers, engaging into work share, doing different versions of work, some temporarily remote roles versus roles that are fully remote as well. Are you seeing, what are you seeing in that space, Dean? And how is talent acquisition actually making those accommodations and calls as they recruit as well?
Yeah, 100%. Well, thanks for allowing me to participate in this. Like, one of the things that we're seeing, especially in a virtual, remote environment, is an adjustment on how employers now are treating candidates during an interview process. So, what you're finding is, well, I can't speak for every employer, but a lot of employers have been, expressing the fact that they have to be reasonable in terms of how they treat people in a process. So, for example, you're interviewing a candidate and there's children in the background possibly crying or running back and forth. These are things that employers are being taught to recognize that are important things that they need to accommodate. Sound distraction, something else that also too that affects especially marginalized groups, is the internet going off. Imagine being and that's just not marginalized. That could be anybody here on this call right now. So imagine being in an interview and all of a sudden your internet goes down, right? So one of the things that a lot of employers are learning, or at least are being taught to do for an equity standpoint, is provide an alternate phone number. It's as easy as that, right? If something happens, you can kind of call in, right? But depending on, or at least the companies that I'm working with and speaking to, I'm at least trying to help them understand where they need to accommodate and where they need to support. And I so agree with like Brittany's points that an employer needs to accommodate. It might not be everything that somebody wants, but there's a duty to accommodate. And that's the terminology that we use, especially when we talk about human rights. And so there are changes happening in our virtual world that companies are starting to adapt to and realize, hey, we really have to support and help candidates in their processes.
Perfect. I'm going to keep going on asking a few questions, Dean, but how do we build more diverse talent pipelines without falling into the trap of focusing only on the numbers. I do love data, but
yeah. How do we make sure we're not just ticking the box? 1% of this, 2% of that.
exactly.
I've heard that question so many times, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's number one, understanding that people are human. They're not tokens. You know, we're not hiring aliens here, and we can't look at candidates who are and applicants who are marginalized as though they're inferior to the rest of the group. No, I think that's the first thing. I think the other thing too is, let's not make excuses and say that there's no one out there. Oh, I would hire more Black people if there was more Black people in this thing. You're absolutely wrong. No, the problem is you need to go out and find the candidates, and maybe they're not in the typical networks, the typical pools that you are used to. So I'll give you a perfect example. I remember working with a client where they were looking for a C-level individual, and you know where they were looking for that C-level individual? At their country club. Yeah, that's why you can't find the talent that you are normally accustomed to finding. Maybe why don't you diversify your talent pool and look beyond the country club and the golf club, and you might find some C-level staff that can do the job and are skilled and qualified. So I think that's the next thing I would kind of add to that. I really believe that there's a vast talent pool, and especially today in our virtual world, we can now look globally to find the right candidates to fill our roles and our opportunities. And so this is not about a number. This is not about a show. This is just now about giving people an equitable opportunity, a fair opportunity, and showing showing ourselves that there are people out there really that can do the roles. And so that's my thoughts on that.
No, perfect. And I just wanted to segue to Bobby, actually, because as we talk about, equity and allowing people to, bring their whole selves to work and, bringing that individuality and diversity into the space, I'm sure we're not short of examples of where people's individuality and even recently their personal choices have landed them into some serious questionable employment statuses after such questionable social action. So one of the questions that we got for you, Bobby, is how does for the employee rather, how do they navigate that fine line between being that individual and, building their personal brand on social and getting very, vocal and building their thought leadership and balancing their professional requirements and not necessarily, being a razor sharp objection or, stark contrast to the brand that their companies may be building? How do they navigate that, blend of building the brand, but also being on brand for their professional lives?
Great question. I think the first thing to keep in mind is that everyone should have done the work to understand their personal brand wherever they go, because that way, if you know what it is and you're going to company A and company B, or you move from team A to team B, you will have a good sense of where your values are, what your work ethic is, what you stand for, and how it aligns with what your team or organization is doing. That said, if you haven't done the work and you're in an organization and you're trying to figure this out, one of the things that you should also have is a conversation with your employer about these things. So let's say, you are with an employer, but you say, look, I'm very passionate about topic X. Let's say it's shoemaking, or it's, helping with your church or helping with the community. And these are things I want to talk about out there on LinkedIn or out there on my YouTube or my Instagram channel. Have that conversation with them. And it's an important piece for them to understand exactly what you're doing, what you're passionate about. Most organizations embrace the fact that we might have a side hustle, or we love to do other things, like to give back to the community. And every organization, even if they won't admit it, will know that every single one of us is certainly looking for other opportunities if they come our way. And so there's nothing wrong with having an active engagement on LinkedIn. Nothing wrong with having an active profile. But you can't. There are ways to get around that where it doesn't seem like, okay, I hate my job, but I'm out here looking for stuff. You can just say, look, here's what I'm passionate about. Here's what I'm talking about. And there are ways to tell stories around your workplace, or even in your community, or even in your home life, that resonate with what you're trying to do, whether it's for a social cause or not. And then if you do something around that, let's say the social cause, and that's a good example, because during this past summer with Black Lives Matter, that was something that organizations and individuals were talking about. And a lot of people were waiting 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, 2 weeks. After at a certain point, how long were they going to wait? And what I find is that there's always a way to communicate these things with passion that are aligned with your values and what you're all about, without making other people look bad, without making your organization look bad, and without making yourself look bad. There are ways to do that. And so I think, and in the case of those who made the mistake or made mistakes in terms of their brand, let's say they said something that didn't go well, or didn't get good feedback, or your HR manager calls you and says, we didn't like this thing you post. I mean, the key really is to be authentic to who you are and what you stand for, and just tell your story. Here's what I was doing. Here's why I thought I was doing it. Own up to the mistake, and be authentic about that, and then come up with a course correction on how you want to do things better, both for yourself and the organization. That's what I would say.
I really appreciate that about authenticity, but also almost like that gut check audit. And that we are coming to time. So there was another question in there about how companies can also, they always have good intentions, but sometimes they do seem polarized. And I think you kind of answered it in that is like, do that audit, do that check. And right. if a company kind of goes a certain way and there's feedback, own it. Own up to it, say you're going to do better, better, now you'll do better. So I think there's this there's always this hesitation, and you've nailed it on
well, one of the things that happens in terms of educating organizations too is that they're always so afraid to have their employees even do that personal brand audit or do that deep dive, because like, well what if they do the deep dive and then 20% leave my organization because they're not aligned with my values in our company? And I'm like, well, you want them to leave. You want to attract people who are aligned with what you're doing versus the ones that are not. So so for me, like if I'm aligned with what a company's doing, I should leave. And that's actually why I did leave the corporate space. So and that's actually a good thing, because you want to build a culture of people who are aligned. Because the more aligned your brand is with yourself, as more you know your brand, that adds focus, clarity, and impact. But the more it's aligned with your company, then you have better attainment, better productivity, better loyalty, better everything, and that's a good thing.
I love that. Thank you so much. Honestly, today there's been such amazing topics discussed, thought leadership, and we are coming to time. So I want to thank all of our speakers: Jeremy Shackey from Lighthouse Labs, Roger Thorpe from Thorpe Benefits, Brittany Taylor from Rudner Law, Dean Del Place from Fix Software, Del Peach, pardon me, and then Bobby Umer from DYBP. A shout out to Bill Banham and the Hacking HR platform for hosting this amazing event. We look forward to having you join us at our next event, and follow us on the hackinghr.io to learn more about upcoming events and join our global community via Slack channel. Thank you again. Thank you, Aldine, for co-hosting. It was
really a pleasure. We need to do this again, Laura.
I agree. I really enjoyed this a lot. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you
everybody.
so much. Take care.
Thank you for having me.
Be well.
Bye.